Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of our podcast, Parallel Play. Today's episode is called Living with a Disability, a Lifetime Journey versus a Sudden Shift, and it's about the differences between growing up with a disability versus acquiring it later in life.
I was diagnosed when I was born with spina bifida and hydrocephalus. And the main aspect of my life that sort of was impacted by those diagnoses was my mobility and being able to do things for myself. I did not get a lot of independence as quickly. Even as a child, when you have some independence just by being able to reach things that you might want for yourself as you get older or, just go places. I did, for a long time when I was younger, I was mostly using a wheelchair to get around because there weren't crutches that were small enough for me. Kindergarten or first grade was when I got my first pair of crutches. And up until then, I was pretty much either in a wheelchair or somebody was carrying me around from place to place. So that was the main thing, I think, that affected me mostly growing up. And then also just kind of having to be in and out of the hospital a lot growing up. I was in the hospital a lot more as a young child than I am now that I'm getting older. Like there were times that I would miss, school or activities with friends because I was in the hospital for different things. Those were probably the two main areas of my life that were most affected.
Did you find that people treated you differently than somebody else who didn't grow up with a disability?
Not until actually later in life, which is interesting. I know I was lucky enough to grow up with several friends who also have physical disabilities. I went to a summer camp that was specifically adapted for children with disabilities. And so, in talking with those friends who are also disabled, I learned that quite a few of them had faced a lot of bullying from other non-disabled kids that they had grown up around. And I feel like I actually got very lucky in that I did not have to deal with a lot of that. I was lucky enough to find a really good group of friends.
I didn't really either, which is kind of weird because, as I'll get into a little later, I was very much the strange kid, the outcast. And I mean, I had friends, but I was never bullied by people. And I would have been a really easy target for that.
Yeah, we both would have been very easy targets, but,
Yeah.
It's interesting that we were both mostly spared.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that disability was talked about more with kids because the way stigmas are built are through bad conversations or lack of understanding about those groups of people. So if you have those conversations with kids early, there would be much less ableism in the world, because people would know that people like us existed. So I grew up with a very different disability. I grew up with very severe mental illness. Like I said, when I was 5 years old was the first time I ever had a hallucination. And I asked my mom what it would look like if I saw a ghost. And things escalated from there. When I was 8, I was a competitive swimmer. I did year-round swim, and I started seeing sharks in the swimming pool. And by the time I was 11, I was having formed visual, auditory, and sometimes tactile hallucinations that would tell me to do things or else they would kill my family. And on top of that, I had GAD and I had ADHD. And honestly, the ADHD affected me more when I was younger than it did as I got into kind of middle school, high school, because the most prevalent things was my psychosis. And so I was out of school a lot. I was in and out of the mental hospital my whole life growing up. I finally got stabilized at like 16. But before that, in high school, I was literally going catatonic every day, completely unresponsive when I would go to school, to the point where we pulled me out of school, and I was homebound for a year because the nurse didn't like it very much when I was catatonic. But like I said, I was lucky that I didn't experience a lot of discrimination from other students. But what I did was, one, from administration, but two, from other parents. So I was a competitive dancer, and there was this one mom that was very, very judgmental towards me. Whenever I wasn't in class, she would say, well, she's just lazy. She just needs to go to school. She's not trying hard enough. And it's like, but I'm going catatonic at school. I mean, if you want to come and deal with me when that happens, then come ahead. That works. But I think there's a lot of stigma in kids with mental illness like that. Whenever I was hospitalized, I was the only person that was there with that kind of stuff because those issues are not things that a child has. These are issues that people have when they're in their early 20s and diagnosed with schizophrenia, not at 8 years old. I didn't have a normal childhood. And I feel like I get sad about that sometimes that I didn't get to experience life like most kids did. And I don't know if you had a similar experience of like there were things that you didn't get to do that that normal, quote unquote, normal kids did.
There was one time at the end of my third grade year, the school had a dance for all of the third graders at the end of the year. And I ended up being hospitalized at the end of the year that year for surgery that I had to have. And as a result, I missed out on that actually being able to be at that dance. But one way that we were able to kind of work around that, it was really sweet. My parents talked to the school and they actually set up a Skype room. And so I was still able to see all of my friends at the dance, and all of my friends were able to kind of take breaks from being out on the dance floor and come up and talk to me. I had the ability to take a psychology class, an AP psychology class, my junior year of high school. And my teacher was kind of going through the signs and symptoms of GAD. And I started to kind of realize as I was looking at the list that she had pulled up from the DSM, I started to kind of realize this is what I go through on a regular basis. Like this is what goes on in my brain. And I was like, oh, okay, I this deserves to be looked into more. I need to look more into this. But then it wasn't actually until I got to college and that I actually started seeing a therapist and that I actually got my diagnosis. So fast forward from my junior year of high school to my freshman year of college. I was living on campus in the dorms, and my anxiety has always been more like auditory triggered, specifically like loud, sudden noises. And pretty much the main trigger that has always kind of gotten me was fire alarms, whether or not they were planned drills or whether or not it was real. Fire alarms have always just been the thing that has triggered my anxiety the worst. And when you're in a college dorm, there's a lot of uncertainty about what could happen on any given day. Sometimes people burn popcorn. Sometimes people don't put water in their ramen before they
Mm-hmm.
put it in the microwave. I don't know why. Sometimes you find out that Coffee Mate is flammable and you light a couch on fire with Coffee Mate creamer. Um, it could be any number of reasons. And so that year, my anxiety really hit hard. That was when I started to seriously think about getting therapy and getting some help in learning how to deal with that and cope with that. Because although I had anxiety symptoms for my entire life, I didn't really know ever what to call it. I was never in therapy, growing up. I was never medicated for it growing up. So I didn't really have any like coping skills that worked for me to deal with that anxiety. So that was when I first started to think seriously about going to therapy.
The first time I remember my physical health being something that I really, really noticed was my senior year of high school. So I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I was diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome first, and then after like more serious vascular and GI tract like fragility complications, I was diagnosed with classical like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome instead. And what I found out was a lot of these fragility issues were things that had still been happening as a kid. Like I found out a few months ago that when I was 13 and in the mental hospital, they'd done a brain MRI and they found a brain aneurysm on it. And it's something I was never told in my life, which is really nice of them to never tell me that. I feel like I kind of needed to know that piece of information. And growing up, I had, the classic symptoms. I had really flexible joints. I couldn't do archery because my arm was too flexible for that to work. I was constantly getting sprains and strains. And so eventually we just started thinking they were psychosomatic pains and they were psychosomatic injuries because, you have a kid with a psychotic disorder. So, of course, the injuries that they're getting, she couldn't possibly be getting injured by doing these things, right? There's nothing wrong there. I had been telling myself that, I'm too young. There's no way I'm having these issues. My trouble with walking, like, it's just me not trying hard enough. I'm just not active enough. And then I became friends with Ella, and you very much normalized physical illness for me. I think that meeting you is one of the best things that happened to me.
Or made me cry.
Well, well, one, because you're just such a good friend. And two, because, like I said, you opened my eyes that it's okay to be disabled. It's real, it's valid, it's not in your head. And I hope that I've been kind of that person for you, that mental health shouldn't be something that you don't have to talk, that you have to be quiet about, and it doesn't have to be this taboo thing that you
Yeah,
don't tell anybody about.
I have felt that same um, connection with you that you were talking about earlier. It has been a really good thing for us to have this connection. For me to be able to have that person that I can work through this stuff with. Thanks for joining us for episode 2 of Parallel Play. We hope you really were able to learn a lot about us and about our experiences, and we hope you'll join us for the next one.